in just less than 30 minutes from now.
Sean Spicer will step to the podium on a day when the death of Otto Warmbier, a pending Senate health care vote, and a historic congressional race in Georgia are all expected to be addressed. We're covering all the news happening now. All eyes on Georgia today and the most expensive House race in American history. How this political slugfest could be a barometer for the 2018 midterms. Plus,
we're very pleased, actually, the Senate's moving forward on health care reform.
And a vote could come as early as next week. But will Republicans have enough support to get their health care bill through the Senate? And with the death of American Otto Warmbier blamed on North Korea, how might American policy change toward that nuclear-armed rogue nation? It's all happening now. But we begin with a Fox News alert. We are awaiting the White House press briefing. It is scheduled to start just a few minutes from now. And it comes during a big clash on Capitol Hill as Democrats fight back against the Republican plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. Welcome to the second hour of Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Julie Banderas. Good afternoon to you. Now, Democrats holding a series of confrontations on the floor of the U.S. Senate as GOP senators put the final touches on the Republican health care bill. Now, Democratic lawmakers are criticizing secret negotiations on the plan, which was crafted behind closed doors.
It comes as both parties are eyeing two special elections today, including one that is now the most expensive House race in U.S. history. And Georgia is seen as a bellwether for next year's midterm elections. We have Fox News team coverage on all of this today. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill with more on the health care bill. First, though, to Kevin Corke. No, first, you're outweighed, Kevin, by the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who's making remarks at a manufacturing summit.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Please. Jay and I go back many, many years. Thank you so much, Jay. I also just want to say what an honor it is to follow my dear friend, our Vice President, Mike Pence. Isn't he doing a great job? You know, together, we are working on a bold agenda for the country. Regulatory reform, health care reform, tax reform, rebuilding our military. And after years of talking about these problems, we're finally doing something about them. But I do not view this as sort of a simple checklist for government or just turning the page on the policies of the recent past. This is much deeper than that. It's much bigger than that. It goes back to something I talked about right when I became Speaker. It's something that is as relevant today as ever. It is about building a confident America. An America where people are confident that they can get a job that pays well in an economy that's growing. An America where people are confident that their children will grow up with real security and opportunity. And we want an America where people are confident that they can withstand any challenge and emerge even stronger. This, to me, is the great task that's before us. I got to tell you, because these are anxious times. We all feel it. It's not something we often think about in the rush of our daily lives, but we are being tested. Our capacity to come together and to always move forward toward a better, stronger nation is being tested. That is what defines us as Americans. It's not about our struggles. It is about how we overcome them, how we bounce back. So this is what drives me every day as a policymaker. How do we build up our country's antibodies? You know what I mean when I say that is how do we fill up that well of resilience we can call on when things get tough? I believe I have come to the exact right place to talk about how we get there. How many times in recent years have the so-called experts told us that American manufacturing is never coming back, that its best days were in the rear-view mirror? But right now, there are nearly 1 million more Americans working in manufacturing than there were at the beginning of this decade. Manufacturing is thriving across the country. Now, you know as well as anyone how quickly things can change. And when they do, will we be able to say that we are ready? Will our workers be ready to take on the jobs that don't even exist yet? Will our economy be ready to handle the disruptions that we can't even fathom yet? That's our test. And that is why, working with President Trump, we are delivering on an agenda to create jobs and to grow our economy. To begin fixing our regulatory system, we have repealed Obama-era red tape with a legislative tool we call the Congressional Review Act. Before this Congress, this tool had only been used successfully once before. Once in the 20 years this tool has been on the books. You know what? Since January, 14 Congressional Review Acts have been signed into law. 14 times we've rolled back oppressive regulations. It is estimated that these actions alone could save families and businesses more than $36 billion. And we're just getting started. And to revitalize Main Street, earlier this month, the House passed the Financial Choice Act. Look, you've seen, as much as anyone, the hit that community banks have taken from countless costly rules coming out of Washington. These banks are the very lifeblood of credit for small businesses across the country. Our plan will give relief to those community banks and make it easier for small businesses to get the capital that they need to grow and to hire. You know, another thing we need to do? We need to make our workforce more resilient, and the thing we need to do that is to close the skills gap. How many times have you been talking about this with your member of Congress, at your Rotary clubs, with your fellow workers? This is so vitally important. We need to connect people with the skills they need to get good, paying, in-demand jobs. And that is why, on this Thursday, the House will be taking action on critical legislation to expand career and technical education. This has strong support from both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, and we need to get it to the President's desk fast. And our work continues to repeal and replace Obamacare. Because I got to tell you, this law is clearly collapsing. Americans nationwide, they're facing double-digit premium increases. And coverage choices are disappearing by the day. In 30% of the counties throughout America, people have one or no plans to choose from. This month, Anthem decided to quit the Obamacare exchange in Ohio, leaving 18 counties with zero coverage options next year. Last month, Blue Cross Blue Shield decided to quit the Missouri exchange, leaving 25 counties with zero coverage options. And also last month, Medica signaled it would quit the Iowa exchange, which will leave 94 of 99 counties in the state of Iowa. That's 70,000 people with zero coverage options. So this is the story across the country. Higher premiums, little or no choice, a death spiral. We are engaged in nothing short of a rescue mission to finally bring relief to Americans struggling under this law and to give everyone access to the care that they need. So just in 5 months, we have made real progress in getting government out of your way. And your support has been the big reason why, and I just wanted to come and say thank you for that. Once in a generation, about once in a generation or so, there's an opportunity to do something absolutely transformational. Something that will have a truly lasting impact long after you and I are gone. That moment is here, and we are going to meet that moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to fix this nation's tax code once and for all. This has got to get done. You may recall that the last time we did this was 3 decades ago, the same year I got my driver's license. A lot has changed since then. Our economy is more interconnected with the rest of the world than ever before. The internet has transformed the way we do business and go about our daily lives. But the world has changed, and as it has changed, our tax code has remained stuck in neutral. It has ballooned to 70,000 pages of rules and regulations that few people today actually understand. You know, there's this old line about the tax code. Our tax code is about 5 times as long as the Bible, but with none of the good news. President Trump recently introduced a set of principles for tax reform. And right now, we, the House, the Senate, the White House, we're working together to turn them into a transformational tax reform plan. Chairman Kevin Brady and our Ways and Means Committee members are holding open hearings and meeting with stakeholders on this right now. I want to take a few minutes and walk you through what
of manufacturers talking about the possibility of tax reform and even a tax form that would be submitted to the IRS on a postcard. Is it possible? Let's talk about it with James Freeman, the assistant editor of the editorial board at the Wall Street Journal, also a Fox News contributor. Paul Ryan is a guy who likes to dream big dreams.
Yeah.
Can any of this come to pass in this atmosphere in Washington?
It could, but of course this year is slipping away here. So I think it was significant that we see him saying he still wants this big, once-in-a-generation, transformative change where we've got this monstrously complicated tax code. He wants to make it easy, simplify personal and business. But healthcare has taken longer than expected. I think there is an argument that do what you can, but you got to cut taxes now. This has to get done this year if you want us to break out of this kind of Obama-style slow growth.
The economy is not the stock market, but the stock market is at record highs right now. Is that because employers and manufacturers are looking forward to some kind of reform?
Yes, and you raise a key point, which is the markets have really gotten ahead of where the economy is performing. A lot of it is this expectation. It was called the Trump bump initially. Since then, I think there's still an optimism that we are going to get a big tax cut this year. Paul Ryan has sketched out a very ambitious vision for that tax cut. And I think whether he's able to go all the way toward that great kind of reform or whether he has to settle for a big tax cut without all the simplification he'd like to do, that's the important question over the next few months.
Well, let's talk about a shakeup in the communications crew at the White House. Press Secretary Sean Spicer getting ready apparently to take on a new role. But first, he will take his usual place at the podium during today's White House press briefing. The White House says Spicer's move is actually a promotion, that he will now head up the communications office behind the scenes. But he's had some memorable moments behind the podium as press secretary. Here's a quick look back at some of them.
Are President Trump's tweets considered official White House statements?
Well, the president is the president of the United States, so they're considered official statements by the president of the United States. I think I got this, but thank you. Maybe. I've said it from the day that I got here until whatever, that there is no connection. You've got Russia. If the president puts Russian salad dressing on his salad tonight, somehow that's a Russian connection.
Well, and we were talking about that a minute ago. I mean, this Russia thing seems to have all of Washington consumed, but well, the Congress would like to get on to other business, and I think a lot of the American people would too.
Yeah, I think the best communication strategy is to deliver some results, to have a product to sell, and that's why that American revival, economic revival project Ryan's talking about, I think is really key for the Trump communications team going forward. But I don't think that job has ever been tougher than it is right now.
Why?
When you combine the fact of Trump's unconventional style, and you never know as his staff exactly where he's going to go and what the message is going to be on Twitter, with this really unprecedented hostility from the press where they've largely abandoned, even in many cases, not even pretending to be objective about President Trump.
Are you saying that they are more hostile to this president than they were to the previous president, for instance?
No question. No question. And you see that, and it's been explicit. You go back to last year as candidate Trump was running, the New York Times news analysis, but on its front page saying basically the normal rules don't apply with this guy. And I think that's been the posture of a lot of the press, that they feel like they need to be the adversaries.
James Freeman from the Wall Street Journal. Good to have you on. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
We're very pleased, actually, the Senate's moving forward on health care reform. Obamacare is in the middle of a tailspin. The law is literally collapsing before our eyes. They'll have lots of amendments. It's going to be a lengthy legislative process, but I'm very excited that the Senate's taking it up.
That was Speaker Paul Ryan on the health care plan that a small group of senators are drafting in secret. That interview earlier today on America's Newsroom. Now, this comes as we await Sean Spicer at the podium, who should be coming out any minute now for a White House press briefing where we might hear more about the plan. Senate Republicans, meantime, hoping to bring the bill to a vote next week, then dive into the process of reconciling it with the House bill. I'm joined now by Isaac Wright, former executive director, Correct the Record Super PAC, and the principal pro-Clinton Super PAC in 2016, and Brian McGuire, former chief of staff to Republican Senator Mitch McConnell and policy director at Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck. Can you guys possibly have longer titles? My gosh. All right, so Brian, in light of Republicans trying to get their secret health care bill through without any committee hearings or public debate, Senate Democrats are now saying that they're going to begin objecting today to committees meeting beyond 2 hours after the Senate comes into session. Do you have a problem with that?
I think that what this is fundamentally a rescue mission that Republicans are undertaking here. And I don't think it works for Democrats to complain about process after they impose nationalized health care on 320 million people on Christmas Eve on a party line vote. So Republicans are on a rescue mission, and I don't ever remember anybody in a sinking ship complaining that the Coast Guard got there too quickly.
Okay, but Isaac, I mean, the next 2 weeks are critical if there's going to be a Senate vote on health care before the 4th of July deadline, which was set by McConnell. The question is that enough time?
Well, Leader McConnell is saying that the vote will happen next week, I think, is the scuttlebutt on the Hill. That's what's being passed around, which at a maximum means you'd have a week to look at the legislation, unlike months that you had to look at the ACA. Republicans are making a deliberate effort to do this in the dark and to hide it from the American people and their constituents. And it's because it's going to cost 27 million Americans their health care. It's going to give lifetime caps to 20 million Americans who at their sickest, when they've paid into insurance all their lives, may say, oh, now the insurance doesn't cover me anymore. You're going to see a 50% increase in children without health insurance and access to health care. These are terrible consequences and lives on the line. There's a reason why Republicans are doing it in secret.
Brian, pertaining to the secret meetings that we keep talking about, Democratic Senator Charles Schumer said the following, and I want to quote him. Have your reaction. As we've made clear to our Republican colleagues, if they continue to insist on ramming through a secret health care bill without any public input or debate, they shouldn't expect business as usual in the Senate. Before passing a massive bill that will affect the lives of every single American, there ought to be a rigorous and robust debate in committees and a full debate on the floor. Now, Brian, if you look back to when Democrats passed the Affordable Care Act, I don't remember Republicans being allowed into those meetings. How is this time any different?
I think that's right. I think Democrats imposed this bill on the country in a way that the country rejected in 4 successive elections. The public has asked Republicans to do something about that. Republicans are now acting with haste to do something to protect the public from this bill that they've told us they don't want. And it doesn't work for Chuck Schumer, who spearheaded that effort 7 years ago, to now complain that the process is somehow not fair.
Okay, but Isaac, I mean...
Let's set the record straight and just get the facts out. That vote was after 25 days of debate, after months of having the bill published online, not only for senators to read, but for the American people to read. That vote took place. The vote we're talking about to happen next week will be limited to 20 hours of debate, after the ACA had 25 days of debate in the U.S. Senate. So let's be clear. You know, I'm just a simple country boy. Maybe my clock is different than the ones here in Washington, but my clock says 25 days is a lot different than 20 hours.
Brian, he makes a point. I mean, as far as the secret meetings are concerned, the one thing that Democrats want is a public stage for debate. And back when Obamacare was born, the Senate Finance Committee actually did hold more than 50 hearings on health reform. So is there any chance that these secret meetings will be open to debate?
I would just point out that the handful of issues that are under discussion right now are very widely known, and everyone understands what the handful of issues that Republicans are trying to work out are. And once they work them out, and they're in a lunch right now where I think they're probably discussing them, those issues hopefully will be resolved. I expect they will be. And everybody will have ample opportunity to discuss them and to see what Republicans have come up with.
All right. Brian McGuire,
That's just
Isaac
not true.
Wright.
Ample time. Right now, Leader McConnell yesterday would not agree to at least guarantee 10 hours to view the bill before a vote. 10 hours? That's not ample time, not compared to the 25 days of debate that took place previously.
All right, we got to call it there. Brian McGuire, Isaac Wright, thank you both for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John.
Well, as we promised, the White House news briefing set to start any minute now. We will take you there live when Sean Spicer steps up to the podium. Also, will the U.S. retaliate for the death of 22-year-old Otto Warmbier, who spent 17 months in a North Korean prison? A longtime diplomatic advisor with his take on it and on China's role and responsibility.
It's a total disgrace what happened to Otto.
Briefing any minute now, held by Sean Spicer, where we could get more reaction to the death of American college student Otto Warmbier. Otto's family announcing his death just days after North Korea sent him home to Ohio in a coma after more than a year and a half in prison there. Plenty of questions remain, though, including how the U.S. might retaliate against North Korea for the death of a young American, held captive, essentially. Former Assistant Secretary of State Robert Charles earlier on Happening Now.
I think we need to stop China in its tracks and say, listen, you're complicit in this kind of activity. This is a small crisis within a much larger crisis, and while we work on ballistic missile defense and we work on our own military contingency options in case everything else breaks down, you, China, have a moral obligation, and this is what the Trump foreign policy has really been about, setting a new moral tone, creating international accountability. You have a moral obligation to weigh in with us to stop this regime from essentially spinning out of control, which is what it did when it murdered an American citizen.
I'm joined now by Rick Grinnell, former advisor to 4 U.S. ambassadors to the UN and a Fox News contributor. Rick, there's got to be consequences. There will be consequences, and President Trump made it clear there will be. The question is, what are they?
Well, I agree with the previous speaker, the Assistant Secretary, that this is a serious situation, that China has to do more. But a moral argument to China is not going to cut it. That's been the problem. Look, China does $2.5 billion in trade with the North Koreans. It's 90% of the North Koreans' economy. This is a serious situation. We need to do what the top 2 diplomatic maneuvers are, which are sanctions, either oil sanctions or banking sanctions. Banking sanctions would get China's attention immediately. We don't need to be making a moral argument. We need to tell China that if they don't start changing the behavior inside North Korea, then we are going to implement banking sanctions. That will get their attention pretty fast. The other thing that we can do is we can make sure that all U.S. tax dollars that are being spent on foreign aid, like to African countries and to other countries, you cannot accept foreign aid from the United States and do business with North Korea. That should come down as a hammer pretty fast.
That needs to come down immediately, and it's surprising and disappointing it hasn't earlier. And given Otto Warmbier's condition, he had been in a coma for 1 year. And it took just months since President Trump took office to get him back to his family, but by then it was too late. And it just speaks volumes about the brutal regime there and the mere fact that the United States hasn't properly dealt with North Korea. So the question now moving forward, how do we deal?
Look, our hearts are extremely heavy for Otto, and he and his family are now credited with focusing the United States government and Americans like never before. We've had 10 missile tests in 2017 by the North Koreans alone. That hasn't shaken the American people like Otto's death has. So I think that what we have to be able to do is take this outrage that we have and put it into a diplomatic maneuver. Let's have diplomacy with muscle. We can't always do everything militarily, but we certainly have a lot of tools in our tool belt that are effective, like sanctions. That should happen very quickly. You know, the other thing, Julie, India, the Philippines also do trade with the North Koreans. So do France and Germany on a very small scale. But still, I think there's a long list of countries we should make perfectly clear it's either us or the North Koreans, and that should start immediately.
Rick Grenell, thank you. Hopefully we'll hear more about this from Sean Spicer, who will be holding that press briefing any minute now. Thank you, Rick.
This is a race about change versus the establishment. The national polls aren't important at this point in time. What's important now as we move into the general are the state battleground polls. And there we're even on the polls, or 1 or 2 points up or 1 or 2 points behind. So we're now engaged. The campaign is on. We like the fact that it's change versus establishment. Hillary Clinton can't be change. She is the establishment.
That's former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort speaking on Happening Now in early August of last year. Right around the time the Washington Post is now reporting he had dinner with a business associate from Ukraine who once served in the Russian army. The Washington Post also reporting Manafort and his wife are the subjects of a subpoena from a Virginia grand jury. So what does it mean to the ongoing Russia investigation? Let's bring in our legal panel. Mercedes Colwin, criminal defense attorney and Fox News legal analyst. Wendy Patrick is a veteran prosecutor and a trial attorney. You know, Wendy, no insult to you prosecutors, but I served on a federal grand jury for 3 years, and we never failed to hand up an indictment. I mean, everything the prosecutors brought to us, we returned a true bill. It's pretty easy to get an indictment.
Well, John, a couple things here. What does this mean in terms of what the process is? So far, this is optics, not topics, because what they're going to have to decide is, what did these two men talk about? Were they colleagues or were they co-conspirators? So the fact that they had a meeting, even as easy as it is to get an indictment, that's smoke, not fire. In other words, they're going to have to move past a cover-up and actually find evidence of a crime. And in doing that, remember, John, this meeting was not cloak and dagger. These two men had dinner at a popular New York hotspot in full view of everything. That kind of context gives that jury some indication of what the content was. It probably wasn't anything confidential.
Yeah, Mercedes, if you're serving as the campaign chairman for a guy who may become and ultimately did become the president of the United States, you want to stay informed. You want to be in touch with what's going on around the world, don't you?
Well, you sure, and that's probably why. And plus, he had some business dealings at the time with the Ukraine. At least that's what's been reported. So therefore, it wouldn't be unnatural for him to have conversations with this person, like he did, in a social setting. And as Wendy said, we don't even know what they spoke about. I mean, it wouldn't be unusual for the two of them that already had prior dealings that had nothing to do with the campaign. At that point, Manafort had nothing to do with President Trump's campaign. So certainly it wouldn't be unusual for the two of them to have this type of interaction and casual conversation at a restaurant.
What if there's money involved, Wendy? I mean, we know that Paul Manafort had business dealings in Russia. If there was money changing hands around that time, is that necessarily going to, you know, result in some kind of criminal problem for him?
Not necessarily, even though it is something that they're going to be talking about, because that's definitely relevant given all his business dealings. And there's already allegations out there to that effect. But, John, here's how it may affect the investigation on a larger scale. It is another forgotten, undisclosed meeting. And when prosecutors are looking at evidence, or grand jury in this case, they're just going to ask themselves, what else has been forgotten, and is it important? So while it may be absolutely innocent misrecollection, right, that we all suffer from that, in context, it's beginning to look like part of a larger picture. At least that's the prosecutor argument. So
if Manafort is the focus of the investigation here, Mercedes, that doesn't necessarily mean that then candidate Trump or the Trump campaign is necessarily even involved. I mean, he had his own business dealings with Russia and with Ukrainians separate from the campaign.
It's amazing how day by day what we see, the tentacles of this investigation getting broader and broader and broader and stretching beyond what's really reasonable. And that's what's happening here. And frankly, it can't be faulted, because if ever there's a criticism about, well, you've kept this, you were myopic in your investigation, they would be criticized there. So keep it broad is what they're doing. And frankly, it's not unusual for prosecutors to have no doubt, don't give the benefit of the doubt to anyone that's in the crosshairs of the investigation.
Does that mean
you see that time and time again? They're not going to give Manafort the benefit of the doubt. They're not going to say, you've had dealings with this person before, you have businesses in in the Ukraine. You had some political contacts, and you were talking about politics. It was totally casual. It's not going to be viewed that way. Anybody that's been worked in the prosecution's office, Wendy has, I have, you're going to have that.
All right. Mercedes Colwin and Wendy Patrick, wish we could continue. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
All right, we are awaiting the White House press briefing. It will begin any minute now. Some issues Spicer will be addressing: the death of Otto Warmbier, the historic congressional race in Georgia, and the Senate teeing up a vote on health care. We're going to bring it to you as soon as it happens live. Plus, a close call over the Baltic Sea. What the U.S. Air Force is saying now about an encounter with a Russian jet amid new tension.
Here's one of the overriding questions as we get ready for today's White House press briefing. How many more of these will actually be delivered by Sean Spicer, the White House spokesman? And the understanding is that he's about to get a promotion at the White House. He's going to be taking over the entire communications effort. And in that position, he will not be delivering the daily briefing anymore. There's also been criticism of the White House because they have been cutting back on daily briefings altogether. So whether or not Sean Spicer will be seen too many more times is, well, we may get the answer to that today. But there are also some deadly serious issues that the White House is considering right now. One of them, what to do about the death of Otto Warmbier, the 22-year-old college student from the University of Virginia who was essentially taken hostage by the North Koreans. They said the fact that he came home in a coma had to do with a case of botulism that resulted from him taking a sleeping pill while he was in North Korean custody. Pretty clear that that is a very, very shaded version of the truth. But Otto Warmbier died yesterday, his parents and his family at his side. More to find out about that story, and certainly more, Julie, to find out about what the United States reaction is going to be.
And regarding North Korea's story about that sleeping pill and botulism, the doctors at the Cleveland hospital where he was being treated had in fact said that there was no sign of botulism in his system. However, if you are suffering from botulism and you are given a sleeping pill, that is a death sentence. You can't survive. That is something that your heart typically would just go into cardiac arrest. And once your brain is deprived of oxygen like he was, which puts you in that sort of coma that he's been for the last year, if you don't wake up after 3 months of that type of coma, you will never wake up again. And sadly, he had to be seen by his family right before his very final moments. Very
sad. So we expect Sean Spicer will be out there momentarily. In the meantime, let's talk about tensions with Russia. There was an armed Russian jet buzzing a U.S. military plane over the Baltic Sea, coming within 5 feet of its wingtip. Comes on the heels of a threat by Russia after the U.S. shot down a Syrian jet. Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon with the latest.
John, just one day after a U.S. Navy F-18 Super Hornet shot down a Syrian jet near the ISIS stronghold of Raqqa, and just a day after Russia issued a stark warning to U.S. warplanes flying east of the Euphrates River